I believe that we stand on the verge of a historic moment.
You ask them what it is about rock and roll music that they like, and the first thing they'll say is the beat, the beat, the beat.
I found pardon for my past, power for the present, bright prospect for the future.
If you talk to the average teenager of today, I know what it does to you.
That could have an unparalleled and unprecedented impact.
I've got a story to tell. Have you?
Welcome back, SSM crew and friends, and hopefully some guests that are seeing us for the first time.
Well, and we need some more subscribers. We're so close. So close to getting to 100.
That's right. If we're watching and you're not subscribing, what are you doing? Because you're not getting the updates. So
we know you're watching. There's like 60% of you that watch every week. You don't subscribe, and it hurts.
I know.
Just a little.
Don't let it hurt. It's good stuff. But listen, if you see it, you need to listen, this is going to be a good one that you like, because John, I hear these conversations a lot. We serve pastors, student pastors, but pastors as well a lot. And I hear a lot of these kind of conversations. And so let me just tell you, I'll never forget the time that I earned an div for another pastor.
Yeah. As one would imagine. You would imagine
for me.
Yeah.
But I remember there was this moment where I realized that not all pastors are good. I knew that growing up. I saw a lot of moral failures and things, but like I thought the pastor I was going to work for, and he did all these nice things for me. But I found out he was having me be his research assistant. And I even had people tell me, man, his message just got so much deeper when you started working with him and all that. And I was so excited and flying high. And I had two bad bosses in the scenario: executive pastor who was a wiener, and a head pastor who or a weenie, and a head pastor who was manipulating. So I found out, like, I went from just assembling research and then answering questions and helping to he asked, and it kind of made me go, I was working on my master's degree at the time, and he said, hey, do you think that you can make these research package you're building for me about 4 pages, double space, and can you use Turabian so I can read it? And I went, nobody's using
Turabian because they want to.
So but he asked for Turabian, and I went, yeah. And like I wrote these, and I kept assuming the best despite what happened. And then I realized he was handing in these papers because it was not on what he was preaching on, what he was asking for. It's like, why do you think you could do that? I go to the executive pastor, the weenie, and I said, hey, I was an intern. I said, I'm really nervous here, but I don't feel right. I called a couple guys that I knew that poured into me. I said, I don't feel right ethically, and I don't feel right. Like, I feel like I shouldn't be doing this. Could you help me address this with the pastor? Here's what Weenie said. He went, we don't have the kind of pastor where you got to have separation. You can just go in there and tell him. Funny thing was, we had separation anytime he didn't want to hang out with us, but not when it meant the executive pastor had to have an awkward conversation. And so I went in there, and listen, I was naive, and a lot of guys that are starting are naive. Some people choose being naive, and eventually you go from naive has to do with age. So eventually you go from naive to ignorant.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. But at this point I was just naive. I've been both, but at this point I was naive, and I said, he went, oh, no, I wasn't having you write anything for school. Oh, my goodness, no. But you know what? I want you to be comfortable, so don't even worry about doing that anymore. And we're getting to the end of the year. Well, then I ended up getting an $800 Christmas bonus as an intern. And he, as a thank you for all the work, he came to me because he wanted to hide his tracks and bought me like $500 worth of new clothes. And I was, and like, as a thank you, and I just went with it because I just assumed it was okay. And I took him at his word rather than seeing what was going on. But here's,
right.
Now this is
I think that speaks to, sometimes too, like, you don't want to think that your pastor's capable of something like that.
Why would you ever want to think that, right?
Right. And so you just believe the best about him because it's easier in that moment to believe the best than it is to believe the truth.
That is 100% right. And yeah. And
I think too, like the reason we're even talking about this, you're like, well, I don't even know what we're talking about. Well, I don't even think we said what we're talking about.
Good story, but where are we going with this?
Yeah, so we looked at the top searches around youth ministry right now, and surprisingly, it's not about games. It's not about culture. They're about how to grow ministry, how to start ministry, how to develop one.
Yeah.
But you can't do any of those things if you constantly feel like you're being blocked by the people above you, ignored by the people around you, or micromanaged.
You're butting heads with them all the time, right?
It's hard.
But it brings up something that I think we can both speak into really well because we've had good and bad. bosses. I think about that. I never even saw the movie Horrible Bosses, but like that's what I'd love to quote, like title the whole thing. But I think that there's a difference because sometimes when we are starting to see, that's why G6 Allies exists. It's why SSM exists, so that we can see pastors be resilient, so that we can see them using great curriculum and becoming better, like working together to be better, not just and that's the problem. But I'm starting to see that the reason we exist is because so much unhealth. I mean, we're always hearing about broken churches, broken organizations. We talked about some of that today. Podcast just came out about Orange and the whole thing at Orange and those. And we hear that, and we've got to choose better. And we've got to be able to, because when all of it becomes so ubiquitous and it feels like it's everywhere, then everybody's a victim. And you go, oh, my pastor's terrible. Well, and you need to be able to discern. Do I have a difficult pastor? Am I difficult? Or do I have an untrustworthy pastor? And those are different
conversations.
Yeah. Like I got guys that are quitting, guys that want to quit ministry because their pastor doesn't like their ideas for the entire church. And in a nice way, my statement is, well, your job isn't to run the whole church. It's to run the student ministry. So get over yourself. Like that's just, if you go work at Wendy's, the manager's going to do that. But then I have guys that come and say, man, my pastor is attacking my family. He's always talking badly about me behind, and that's different. And then there's pastors where sometimes
I've got a guy. I have a guy that we worked with at one point. The senior pastor stole his wife's cell phone and read through the whole thing.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I'm telling you, we're telling you stories. These are not uncommon stories. And the problem is because we have made being a pastor, we allow too many common things to come in and snatch away what should be uncommon and focused. And so maybe we talk about through all this. Not all pastors are created equal, and you have to be 100%. I also see this myopic tunnel vision of how that pastor is horrible, but I'm amazing, and all of my intentions are pure. And you've got to read it both ways, and you've got to be able to understand. I heard one of the best things I ever heard was from a pastor that he and I connected, knew each other years ago, but he said, I found out that when I left an unhealthy church, I brought that unhealth with me because I never dealt with it. And it is a lot of dealing with it. And people say, well, you know, I hear guys say, well, why isn't that the same as a marketing job or a fast food job or whatever? Because we deal with the deep things of who people are. And then whenever something goes wrong, that's where people attack. It's not like people just went, well, Bill was terrible at his job. And you went, well, I got a 10% raise in another company, so deal with it.
Well, perfect example.
It's different.
Perfect example of that. The first church I ever served at only met, like the pastor was so hands off that the only time that you met with him was if you were in trouble.
Yeah.
So,
that's the worst.
So if you were to get the drop by, or if you were to get the text message, hey, can you talk? You knew it wasn't a good thing. Yeah. So now I'm in this, then you fast forward and the church that I'm in now, great pastor, and he's really good at this. He knows, like he makes it a point during the week to just stop by and talk to us. Each of us on his way down the hallway, he'll just stop in. Just, hey, how you doing? How's your family?
It's a big deal.
Because he doesn't want the communication that comes to us to only ever be that negative interaction. But absolutely. He has grown in that, because when I first got here, that wasn't kind of naturally part of the culture. And I had to tell him, like, hey, dude, this is where I'm coming from. Every single time you text me and you're like, hey, can you meet? I don't know what it's about. I don't know if you're wanting to get on to me about something. But that's the culture I'm coming from.
Here's the other thing. I'm not telling you every church needs to stay small. I'm not saying that the Bible doesn't care about reaching people and how many people are reached. It's all through the Bible. We name that. But I do think that the 2% of churches, and to get to the top of most mega organizations, whether it's a church or it's a mega organization, you got to do some shady stuff to get there. And you got to be you often have to be a shady person. Anybody that goes, well, that's not true. Well, you've never been around it, shared with it, been with those people. You listen to them on a podcast and then go, man, you do what I did for, with that. And you need to understand they're people, but it would behoove us to not chase the things that the 2% makes the big issue, and to say, hey, maybe if my church has 100 or 200, or maybe my church has 500, that's okay. And I need to work with and grow the students that I have where I'm at, and not try and be like those people, because we're about to give you a spectrum of difficult leadership that can go untrustworthy, and then it can also be difficult. And a lot of it comes from stopping being pastors and trying to be figureheads and leaders, and rather than starting with pastor. And so, because that's that idea, pastors naturally lead, but shepherding people is not always good leadership, according to the rest of the world, right? So we have the vision vortex.
Those are the guys. Everything is about their agenda.
They want everybody aligned with them, but they never really communicate why. That's the do as I say, and you don't need to know why. Like it's just because I said so.
Well, and I think a lot of times they don't even really know how. They just know what it looks like. And what it looks like is saying, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And I'm not designed to be a yes man. I don't do well with those guys.
Yep. Well, and if you're not furthering that brand or their brand, you just get sidelined. And so it's very much the hot and cold world. And that can be difficult because guys can be, and you need to be able to look at this spectrum. First of all, if you have a problem with other people on staff, that doesn't always mean you quit, leave, or anything like that. It means that you got.
And it doesn't always mean that the other person's the problem.
Martin Lloyd-Jones, one of your favorites, once said, "It doesn't matter how gifted you are. If you're hard to get on with, you'll always have trouble." But like the vision vortex guy, man, it's like sometimes pastors can look at this as a spectrum. They can lean towards vision vortex and not realize it. They just get so focused in, and sometimes they need you to not be a weenie, and you got to step up and fight for, in a respectful way, hey, I want to do that, but can I help further what we're doing as a church this way? And you can work on those things. There's also the micromanager. The funny thing is, no church staff has ever had a micromanager, and yet every church staff has a micromanager.
Yeah.
Because the title itself is so negative, nobody will take it.
Yeah. Those are the guys that ask for trust, but they never really give it.
Yeah.
And they constantly
100%.
want updates and approvals, but they want the ability to veto anything.
Well,
like even the smallest detail.
With all of that comes fear. It comes this crushing of not only of creativity, but just of value and worth. Because like I love this is where leadership strategy does overdo the pastoring side of it sometimes, or bad pastoring, is that there are leaders that say, man, the most successful leaders hire people and then they tell them, I didn't hire you to tell you what to do. I hired you to go do it. So you tell me what you need, but you need to understand something. I have this theory, John, you tell me if I'm wrong. I think everybody is a micromanager. It just depends on what you are most passionate about and why you're passionate about it. And I say it this way. It's okay to micromanage certain things that you're really focused on.
Yeah.
But if you are all about control, that's where I think that sometimes the untrustworthy, but usually just the difficult pastors come in, because everything needs to be controlled. But it's okay.
Well, and I think a lot of times those guys are operating from the insecurity of somebody at some point in their life let them down.
Oh, and somebody micromanaged them.
Yeah, and so I totally get it. I don't think it begins from a place. That's the thing to keep in mind. Like I think people develop into these things.
Either.
Yeah, but I don't think that they intend to come across as negative as they do, or intend to lead the way that they lead. But I think it can just when people get to the point where they're micromanaging details, it communicates that there is a distrust in the leadership. And one of the things you say to people all the time when we're talking with guys is, if there's somebody that can do something 70% as well as you can, then you need to empower them to do it. There's just something about like releasing people to go do something and understanding that if you have somebody that is able to do something at the 70% milestone, celebrate that 70% as if they've done the 100.
Absolutely.
Because they're going to come back the next time and they're going to continue to do it.
And give them encouraging feedback, right? Like that's like you can do. The funny thing is none of these, including this last one, maybe, I don't know, but none of the stuff we're talking about does. In Christianity, it's not enough. I love this quote by Spurgeon. It's not enough to be sincere, because you have to also be sincere and be right. And he uses the analogy of, you can sincerely drink poison, but you will sincerely die.
Yeah.
You don't have to be sincere. And so this idea, like Christianity, I think has this beautiful balance of intentions pave the road to hell, but they are also important. We have to look at somebody's intentions and judge them, and they're usually not very good, but also your actions matter too. Like you can't divorce them, and we try to divorce them. We try and say, and I've done that too. I try and say, well, intentions are fine, but like every micromanager, they're always at the forefront of their mind saying, oh man, it's just got to be perfect for the Lord. But they have, even though their intention is to give God something good, I think it's a strange fire because it's not the way God's given it. Vision vortex guys, man, we got to be about reaching people in the community. And and all that's easy, and it's easy for us to be that way, especially when we have volunteer leaders, like you're saying, and you're like, no, we're not doing your ideas because we're going to reach students this way. But the ghost leader is the last one.
Yeah, the ghost leader I've had before.
Oh.
They are typically not available.
Yeah,
you can't reach them. You know that when everybody else calls them, they're going to answer, but when you call, you ain't going to get them. They're disengaged.
mm-hmm.
They kind of tell you like, "Hey, I trust you. That's your jurisdiction. You do what you want."
They're vague too. Like they tell you to do whatever you feel and what you feel like you're going to do, and then they critique it and come back around afterward.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and I've said it, excuse me, my allergies are kicking in.
I'm with you.
But I've said it before, unset expectations are premeditated resentments.
That's right.
And that is really true in marriage. It's really true in ministry and in relationships in general.
Yep.
And I think a lot of times, like the ghost leader, again, not starting from a place of ill intent. I think that those guys often will hire people and say, I hired you to do the job and I trust you to do the job to my standard. But you're not ever really communicated with what that standard is. So
yeah.
You don't know where they stand on things until after the fact. And you don't typically get called into the office unless you need to get a good speaking to.
And that, I would tell you, well, never mind. I won't. We were going to go back to that, and we will. But I think, that's such an important thing. I don't know, it's just such a big deal. And so, when we look at all of this stuff, and I think that it's important as we're thinking through what this looks like, that all of these have both the difficult phase where somebody genuinely is not trying to do those things, but then you also have the unhealthy phase. And I know most of us don't think this, but the truth is I've sat on more conversations that feel like the Righteous Gemstones clips or feel like some kind of crazy church thing that you just see on TV than anything else. Like they are absolutely, people intend. Some I've served for pastors that I don't feel confident that they know Jesus. Now I can't make that decision. I just go, I don't see it. And so I think we have to understand that there is misunderstood and then there's trustworthy.
Yeah.
It's important. You got to recognize that some pastors aren't toxic. They're just unclear. They may be unaware or untrained.
I mean, the discipleship, the discipleship deficit manifests itself really glaringly in the pastoral spectrum of your church. I think that unfortunately there are a lot of guys in pastoral ministry that have never been discipled. And so they're telling you to disciple people, but they've never been discipled themselves.
Isn't that crazy? A crazy thought too. That's
kind of like going to a dentist with bad teeth. It's not something that you would choose to do.
That's right.
But
I
think a lot of church people sit in services on Sunday and they sit under pastors who the amount of time they've spent with the Lord is the time that they're in the room together.
Yeah, so this is something we talked about, and it was kind of cool for us to look at. But I want to say this well, but I feel like we have guys in our cohorts and that are close to our ministry and members of what we do, and the statements that they make because they've never been invested in or taught by their current pastors, any pastors. And I'm not saying they all have toxic, but I'm just saying it hasn't been done well. And we've watched their leadership in a year or two just absolutely grow to the point that some are looking at being head pastors and some are looking at because they want to encourage the same thing. And that's the difference. That's the key, is creating that world. And so, creating and building up in guys and developing them, people will develop. The problem is so many pastors are worried about the next thing. They're not worried about what God has them here. Like there was a church that I got a call from to consult for a church. And the statement was, we got to hire an executive pastor. And I said, okay, but why? There's five.
That's always the go-to.
But they said there's 4 or 5 people on staff. There's like 800 people in the church. And they said, we just got to do it. And I said, let me throw this out to you. If you need an executive, they said, we just need him to manage we need him to preach and to talk with people. And then we need somebody to manage the staff. And I said, if your head pastor can teach, but they can't lead a staff of 5 people, you need to fire them. You don't need to do the opposite. And sure enough, they hired an executive pastor, and then he ran him off in a year and a half and caused continual problems.
Well, and I've seen churches where they hire the executive guy, and the executive guy runs everybody out, and then turns around and runs the head guy out, and he becomes the guy.
And that's the key. It's not about shepherding, leading, and developing people. It's always a game to get ahead. It feels like it's a corporation, not like it's a church. And I think, it's important to know, man, that not every pastor is toxic. Not every difficult pastor is toxic, right? Not every difficult person is toxic. Maybe they're unclear, maybe they're unaware, or they're just untrained. But misunderstood leaders, man, they can still lead well. Unfortunately, leaders, untrustworthy leaders, though, can't. And
yeah, that's a whole different playbook.
And that's kind of where I think we're at when we talk about bad pastors. It's one thing to serve for a difficult pastor, but we need to talk about the line of trustworthy, like untrustworthy, and just difficult. And sometimes the issue is we focus so hard on the 3 or 4 things we can't change that we absolutely drop the ball in the things that we can control, right? And that becomes an issue. We become so hyper-focused on a few things that we don't like. And the truth is, we also struggle with people that hyper-focus on our problems too. And so like this idea of like a 360, are we difficult people? Everybody's difficult in certain ways, but are we just as difficult as those that we're struggling with or not? That's kind of where we're at, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm reading a book right now from Ryan Leake on how to work with complicated people, and you can see it coming a mile away when you start the book that the whole first chapter is about why you're a complicated person to work with. But it really is true. I think so often we're so likely to, when we have an issue with somebody else, we just label that person as complicated. Right. Or when we have an issue with the way someone's leading us, then we label them as difficult to work for, a bad leader, or untrustworthy.
And so as you say that, it makes me think that we are such an all or nothing culture. That's why it even makes, that's why it makes discipleship so difficult, right? Like if you sit down, or even developing people can be difficult. It doesn't make us any less culpable or accountable to do it. But it is hard because when you talk, if you're a student pastor talking with students, volunteers, if you're a pastor talking with a pastor, you point out, hey, this is a place you can grow. And what do? We go to the extreme. Oh, you must think I'm terrible at this and this. Oh man, that's just really hurt. And the truth is, no. You just need to help make some changes. And I think we need to understand that trust, or we look at a pastor and a pastor makes a call we don't like. And so we decide that they are a bad pastor or not pastoring well because they didn't agree with us. And like, what at the core of it, what an arrogant thing that we think, and we all think it, what an arrogant and hateful thing to think that because the guy who's accountable for me didn't agree with what I should do, boo. Like that's not being able to be shepherded. But then there's a difference between that and something else. Between that and a pastor asking you to do something unethical or being immoral. And so I think we have to understand that trust is never an all or nothing thing. Like it exists at levels. And
yeah, there are definitely levels within organizations.
Yeah. And I mean, Carol Kinsey Goman wrote an article about this. I think it's important. Like one of her quotes is like, collaboration requires trust, but trust is built in drops, but lost in buckets. And so like how we build that trust matters. And so sometimes I think there's a foundational level that she talks about there's 6 of these elements. The first one is self-trust. And do you believe in your work and your call? You believe your work and your calling matter? I would even go so far as to say, do I believe that I bring value? And here's where you and I talk about this in our own experiences, in other guys' experiences. It's this: most of us serving in churches, God trusts us in a position to lean on him and to do it well. We don't trust ourselves, but rather than being so close to the shepherd and so close to the Father that we can draw purpose and meaning and confidence from that, we lean on that with our superiors. And if you put yourself in a position where the only thing that validates you is those above you, you will always have toxic people in your mind because they're never going to give you what only God was designed to give you, if that makes sense.
Well, that's true in all relationships, especially within the work relationship. But I mean, think about how that works out in marriage, right? Like if you are putting on your spouse what only Jesus can support, your marriage will be left in shambles because, in my marriage, I'm the husband, I'm not the savior.
Right.
And if I take on the role of savior, I will be a bad one, and I will crush her.
Sanctifier either, right? Like that's where some of us get in trouble, and I get in trouble with that. It's like, well, I got to help you be better, and sometimes it's not up to me to do that.
Yeah, it's not. And to your point, and to what Carol Goman said, like, do you believe that your work and your calling matter, and do you believe that you bring value to the position? And I think when you do, that kind of leads to the second thing. When you do bring value to the position,
And when you believe that you do, right? 'Cause
Yeah,
I
when
think
you
do no
believe.
matter what, but when you believe that you're bringing something of value, and I think because of the extremities here with people, not perfection. You don't bring perfection to the team. You're not expected
Right.
to bring perfection, but do you bring value to it, right? You can.
Right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and I think that leads up to team trust, right? Can your team count on you?
Yep.
Can your team count on each other?
Yeah. It makes or breaks with teams, right? And I almost think you and I have this conversation because even if we lean on the team for validation, you and I talk about this. We've mentioned it before. We've been frustrated with a superior, or we've been frustrated with a team member, and then the question, you asked me this once, and then I would bring it back up to you, and you'd go, yes. And then we bring it back up, but we ask the question, like when we're frustrated with something somebody has given us or feedback, the response is when we're mad, well, hold on. Were you expecting to get something out of that that they didn't know? Were you going to them expecting something that you knew you couldn't get? And usually it's, I'm frustrated with another situation or with something related. And so I go, hey, how does this look? Or what do you think about this? And they don't give me the response that I need because they don't know that. And I'm looking for them for something they can't give. And so I see that a lot with teams where the principle moves into teams, I think, of you can't expect your team to trust you any more than you are trustworthy with them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's a biblical thing too, in terms of forgiveness. Like you're only going to be extended the forgiveness that you're willing to extend, and that's a biblical principle.
And I mean, it's like the guy who he doesn't help anybody else with their ministry. He doesn't have conversations with other people like he should. He is not punctual. He's not all these things, but that's usually the person that gets angry the quickest that other people aren't supporting them. And then you go, and it doesn't mean that you have to give every single thing that you desire, you require, because we all require and give different things. But like when you look at your team, can your team count on one another to prepare for each other? Because most of the time, I think it feels like high school or college group projects. There's about two people pulling one or two people pulling the whole thing, and everybody else is just doing the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Right? So sometimes it's not your leader. Sometimes it's your team. Sometimes it's you not believing that you contribute enough, and so as a result, your leader can never affirm you enough in that.
Well, and I think too, like if you're in a situation, I know this is a little more application driven, but if you're in a situation where you're on a staff and everybody's kind of siloed, and you want people to collaborate with you or to be interested in what you're doing, the first thing I would ask you is, number one, like, what is your prayer life like in relation to that person on your staff that you're frustrated with? Like, are you praying for them and their family? Two, are you trying to step into their silo? Are you trying to step into their ministry and see how you can support and uphold them to build trust? Or are you just waiting and expecting that they're going to step over and all of a sudden start caring about what you're doing? Right. Because if you're not extending care and affection to the thing that they're pouring their life into, then how dare you get mad that they're not pouring their life into your ministry too? So our thing is here, like when we win together. And when we lose together. And so we try our best to be involved. And one of the things that is a phenomenal thing, and Ian, you've remarked on it when you've come and you've spoken for me, is when we do like Disciple Now, every single person on my staff is involved in some way, shape, or form in a big way. Mm-hmm. And it's not because they're doing it under compulsion. They're doing it because they want to genuinely see us win.
And there's a healthy truth to that I've seen where you involve a lot of people, but then somebody always gets the short end of the stick. What I love about what we've experienced with your D-Nows too is that everybody just values what each individual is doing at the same level. Like Sunday morning, it's as important as D-Now because D-Now leads into that. So, hey, we're gonna give this 100% because of that. Where I've served at places where I had something planned for 6 months. There was a funeral. Nobody had been working on anything that we talked about for 6 months, even though we've been having meetings. And so when they could have easily had all of it done, I got the short end of the stick and lost a bunch of stuff because they're doing a funeral in another room that wasn't even related to what we were doing. But the fact that your team all believes in the mission and it's like, hey, we're going to make these things excellent no matter what we do. And I think, though, that comes, this is the difficult thing. You may have to serve in unhealthy churches, and every church is unhealthy to an extent. There's a difference between unhealthy and toxic, right? And so I would tell you, if you have a toxic church, I would find somewhere else to be, unless you're the lead pastor, and then you can affect some change. Most of the time, it's very difficult to affect change it's almost impossible unless you're the lead pastor. And so I think that moves into the third layer of trust, which is leader trust. Do you believe your pastor will support you publicly and correct you privately? Do you believe that they support you behind closed doors as much as they support you when you're there in the conversation, right?
Mhm.
And that's a horrible, and you and I have been in that world many times, multiple times, where
Yeah.
that's part of why we do the ministry that we do and we run the network that we run, because when I'm having conversations with the guys that are hurting here, I'm not running my mouth about them to other ones. And you and I even ran into some national and state level conventions or groups where you had a guy call you who wanted you to come and be a part of the a part of their thing, and he goes, yeah, but these other guys that are near you, and he just starts talking about private stuff with you, and it's like, no, I don't want to come work with you. I serve for some guys in churches, and it will take you a long time to get this if I don't tell you, because it took me, maybe you're not dumb like me, but it took me 10 years. If they talk about other people one way in front of you, they talk about you that way when you're not there.
I can remember that when I experienced like growing up in the church, and all of a sudden this man's wife was sitting with that man's wife, and then all of a sudden they were married, and they were four pews away from one another, and then it happened again.
Oh, God.
And I asked my dad, I'm like, at this point I didn't know, I'm still green behind the ears, and so I asked my dad, I'm like, what in the world? And he said, I'm just telling you, son, if someone will cheat for you, they will cheat on you. And it's 100% true. But to that question of, do you believe your pastor will support you publicly and correct you privately?
Yeah.
We're really good at, and this is not an original thought, but we are really, really good at judging people for their actions and desiring to be judged according to our intentions.
That's right.
And the thing that I think of when it comes to this is, like, I had a meeting with my senior pastor yesterday in which I went to him just to say, hey, there's something that you need to be aware of, and I don't want it to blindside you.
Yeah.
And that's something where it's like, can your pastor trust you?
Yeah.
That you're going to support him publicly, that you're going
both ways.
And you're going to correct him privately. Like, do you have that relationship going both ways? When you're in a healthy church, that's kind of a telltale sign. Now, I will say the caveat to that is, if you're like some 22-year-old kid that just got out of seminary, or a 22-year-old kid that's just now doing it, it's your first job and you're jumping in.
Yeah.
Probably don't go to him and try to correct him all the time unless it's like something egregious.
There's a lot to say about just listening and learning.
Yeah, you probably need to just zip it up and not jump into that. I know that probably offends you because every hill's worth dying on for you right now.
Right.
But trust me, the longer that you are in this, I'm 15 years in, Ian's 20 years in, I am more and more convinced that as I look around the scope of ministry, the things that I thought were worth giving my life for and planting a flag on 10 years ago, I don't even think about. I just don't even, it's not worth my time, because it's not worth the battle. It's an unnecessary battle that takes you away from the mission. And speaking of mission, you have mission trust, right?
Nice segue.
Thank you. Do you believe in the church's direction? And I think an easy way to say that, and I'll let you chime in.
Go ahead.
I think an easy way to say that is like, so I've served on 3 church staffs, and I will honestly tell you, this is the church that I would choose to attend if I was not on staff, because I believe in the direction. I believe in the leadership. It is a church that I want to see move in that direction. I trust the mission, right? We want to see people connect to Jesus in his church, grow in their faith and understanding of God's word, serve Jesus here and around the world. That's the mission. Everything we do funnels through that. And that's the direction that we're going.
If you wouldn't attend the church that you serve at, you probably should find another church to serve at. Eventually,
or if you're in a place where you can in a healthy way affect change, help support the pastor's vision and help transform that church into a church that you would want to attend.
There is, and I think that there's an interesting because at least this mindset was very prevalent with how I grew up and where I've done ministry. And when you spend your whole life in church, but then you also become a pastor at one point, and you've also worked in the secular world, like it gives you some interesting thoughts for long term of how I viewed it before I was actually doing it. We often think leader, mission, and mission are the same thing, or leader and mission are the same thing. And the truth is, they really aren't a lot of times. Like, they don't have to be. And so you would hope that your pastor embodies that mission, but a lot of times some of the stuff, and this kind of will lead into some more of what we're talking about, but the question becomes, do I have leaders there are leaders that relationally, absolutely, I trust you. Absolutely, I really appreciate what you're doing for me. But from an actual mission standpoint, they say what they want to be true without it being true. And so I served at a church once where they said, we're a church of small groups. We're all about small groups. It's got to be small groups and community. And that's where we grow. Well, less than 10% of our church, like 5%, was in small groups. And it was kind of
probably a direct correlation to the percentage of your staff too.
It was, and it was also a direct correlation to the fact that the pastor did not think he should have to attend a small group because pastors can't attend it. And once you lose the fact that you're no longer a believer and now you're a pastor, so you're above them, that's a hard trust barrier to break.
Mm.
Your mission and your leader can be two different things. And a lot of times you see it when a new leader comes in and he has to shift that mission. But I think that a lot of that moves in to organizational trust. And this is where this to me makes or breaks long-term stay. And it's what most churches are doing very poorly. And that's why we exist. And that's why we love what we do. But organizational trust, you could probably call this church trust because this article was not written specifically for churches. But I would ask the question, does your leadership, those above you, usually a executive pastor and a head pastor or, a leadership team, whatever it is, that culture will go down and work its way down. Does your leadership empower you or does it stifle you? And here's the difference. If giving you direction and then being, saying we can't do this, but we will do this, or, hey, I get what you're going, like actually trying to develop you, that's not stifling, that's guiding, and that's empowering, that's helping. Stifling comes when it's micromanagement. If it's not their idea, it doesn't go. There's no room to fail. Even if they say there's no room to quite fail. That trust, what's crazy to me is one of the churches I was at, and I've watched this work differently. I can tell you several churches. One of them, the head pastor, then the executive pastor who became the head pastor, they played everybody against themselves. They played all of the executive team, the 5 guys, against themselves. They would tell this guy to give this guy an order when they were literally 20 feet away. Hey, go tell them what to do. They need to do this, this, and this. Well, that didn't make any sense. It wasn't like go work on that. And then the pastor at one point was throwing smoke screens to hide things he was doing. That's one way where you can see the organizational trust breaks down, because the problem is when I should have been empowering people underneath me, I was too busy trying to figure out the politics of what was going on around me.
Mm-hmm.
We went to another church that everything was run almost iron-fistedly through an elder board, 3 or 4 of which the men had never been in ministry, didn't really know much about it. They just happened to be good Christian guys from an outside standpoint. And so, but you never got to affect any change or growth. And it was like, what are we doing here? Like, you shut, and then the conversation, you never knew what conversations were being had about you. And then I went to another church where,
and that's awful when you know that there's conversations happening in other offices about you
all the time. Well, then the last one was just the head pastor ran it top down, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to be able to, if you're empowered, that means it's okay to fail, but you got to learn from it. It means that you,
and it's one of the things we talk about with our guys. I mean, this Multipliers book, by Liz Wiseman, one of the things we talk about is identifying and understanding the native genius within your ministry, so you can
not being a diminisher.
Yeah,
right?
So you can empower people and not stifle them. I think of a church that I served at, and one of the things that I believe that the Lord, I mean, I'm not, we talked about this with our guys as well. Like, it's okay to know the things that you're good at and the things that you're competent in.
Right.
I, by my nature, have a shepherd's heart. I lean towards people in that way. And I went to this church, and one of the things that I believe works in a big way is when you can get to the hospital and when you can get to people in crisis, you go and you do that. Mm-hmm. And at this particular church that I served at, we were not permitted to do that because it was not. So that part of me, that part of my ability was stifled. I wasn't permitted to do it. Yep. Well, why wasn't I permitted to do it? Well, the reason I wasn't permitted to do it was because the senior pastor hated it. Yeah. And because he didn't want to look bad, nobody else was permitted to. And so you get in those situations where sometimes people stifle you out of their own insecurity. Mm-hmm. And I think healthy leaders will empower people to do things that they're not good at.
Well, that 6th level of trust, I think, should be like 5A. It should be like a boot underneath this, because it's exactly what you're saying is there is shared trust in the wisdom of your team. And so, like, what you're describing here, and that's what's so crazy to me, is a top-down wisdom. like you don't believe in the collective wisdom or brilliance of a team. And so, I mean, I go back, I said this earlier in the podcast, but I go back to a guy who, a business leader who just said, he said, I had an HR problem where we had to hire 50 people in 50 days to fix a problem in this big company. And he said, my HR guy who I believed in, he came to me and he said, I got this problem. We got to hire 50 people in 50 days. What do we do? And he said, if I need to fire you, I can, but I hired you for you to do that. Like, that's not, I don't need to know how to do that. You're my I think he was COO. He said, you're my COO. You do it. Whatever you come up with, you give me 3 options and let's go. And that's where I think that this is where you start to see maybe toxic versus difficult from both ends, because I know a lot of student pastors that go to their pastor and say, they'll go, well, I think we need to do this, this, and this, and they just give you what to do, what they're going to do, and then when the pastor goes, yeah, I don't think that that's okay. So they come across threatening, they come across controlling, and then they just give them an ultimatum, and then they leave and go, my pastor doesn't believe in me. He didn't want to do jump bounce night 3 times a month, and he gets angry. And I'm just being facetious, but they say something like that, and then they move on. But also, what I had a guy that discipled me tell me a long time ago goes along with the story I just told about the HR guy. He said, I want to fire people who come to me with a problem or one thing to do. He said, I want to promote people who come and explain a problem and then give me the solutions to that problem. And I wonder if how we market and serve something absolutely would change how our pastors see us, because it would show a maturity in a lot of next gen and student pastors if we came and said, hey, pastor, I want to support our mission here. I see that we're lacking here. What if we did one of these 3 things? What do you think about that? And there's a certain amount of respect and control that person can hand off, but it doesn't start with a conflict, because sometimes as a leader, when you've been on the other side of that, when somebody comes to you with a yes or no and it's impassioned, you feel like you either have to answer yes to something you can't fully agree with, or you have to suffer the argument and kickback of saying no. Like, you don't feel like there's any good options. But if more guys would come and say, and that's where you can start to discern. If you go to your pastor 4 or 5 or 6 times with respectful ideas, communicated clearly, written down, even articulated well, and they just don't want to hear any of it, then that's the time to go, well, maybe this is a little more toxic than unhealthy or difficult. But I think that we would see a lot of change if you'd have pastors lay those things out. And I think a lot of student pastors would go, oh, wow. Okay, great. And
I think sometimes too, to that point, I think sometimes too, it can be that the pastor's got a lot of boulders he's trying to push up the hill.
Yeah.
And it could be that while that's a great idea, there's something that is pressing down on him that he's trying to move the needle on. And so for you as the student guy, you could step in that situation and say, hey, what are the things you're trying to move the needle on right now? And is there a way that I can step aside? Yeah. Is there a way that I can step beside you and kind of help you do that? And if there isn't, then say, well, then I'd like to introduce this idea for discussion.
Yeah.
And so I think first and foremost, understand that just because you see it as an emergent need doesn't mean that your pastor doesn't see it as an emergent need. Mm-hmm. But your pastor, and I'm more and more convinced the longer that I'm in ministry, your pastor is doing probably 100 more things. A good pastor is doing probably 100 more things than you even are aware of. Mm-hmm. One of the best things that my first pastor ever did for me, his name was Paul Baxter.
Yeah. OPB.
He and I would sit down on Thursdays and he would present situations within the church to me. And he would just say, hey, here's a situation. And it wouldn't even necessarily be a present one. Sometimes it would be ones that had already fleshed out. And he would say, knowing what you know, how would you handle it? And so he would let me walk through kind of troubleshooting how I would handle a situation. And I walk through that and he'd go, okay, I like that. I like that. Let me tell you though, he said, you got a 3-year view. Here's my 33-year view. Right. Here's what you don't know. Here's what you don't see.
And when you say that, I want to get the tone right here. He's not telling you you're wrong. He's helping expand how you saw it, right?
Yeah, what he's saying is, based off your 3-year view, I think that is an adequate diagnosis, and I think that is an okay way. Here's what I see that you don't, though. Here's the 30 years of family relationships. Here's the background of the family community. That's why I tell guys all the time, the number one thing that you need to be when you get somewhere is a historian, because you need as much information as you can have available to you. You need to learn it so that you can make pastoral decisions that are really wise and thought through. And you need advisors. You need people that you can go to and you can say, hey, I can only see this for what it is. I need you to tell me the rest of it. And that kind of goes with, too, kind of the idea that we were going to talk about next. And we probably need to go ahead and maybe get close to wrapping it up because this is going to be a long one.
We can get close. I think, well, something I think you said was so good and all of that, and it does lead into it. But I want to, on this side of the wall, say that this is one of the worst. Well, also, if you read the book A Tale of Three Kings by Gene Edwards, it's an excellent book. It's one of the most misused and manipulatable books I've ever seen as well. And I want you to see something, and just bear with me if you're listening to this. The anointing of the pastor is the biggest crock in church leadership I've ever heard in my life. It is bad theology, it's poor leadership, and it opens up pastors to be abusers, manipulators, and to be bad at what they do and to not shepherd people. And here's why I think that's important. Here's why it can make it healthy. Guys leave the church because they worship the anointing of the pastor, and they leave because they're disillusioned because that pastor was supposed to be slightly less than the Pope in what he did for you, and to be almost infallible. And I watch guys who never disagree with anything, and they don't realize that they can internally disagree and learn something not to do while still loving their pastor. But if you will get past that garbage of going, well, they're anointed, I don't know, and then you could see them as people. Because you have just as much anointing as your pastor has. You have the same Holy Spirit, the same Savior, the same calling. The difference is God has placed you in positions where you can respect and submit to that authority on a church level, or you can move to another place. But if you could see your pastor as a human, you can do all of the things that we're doing. You can say, oh man, he really snapped at me. And instead of going, this anointed angel on high, the consternation in my soul, you should never snap at me. I'm another pastor, but I guess it's okay. And then you get hurt. Well, rather than doing that, you could say, man, he's got a lot on his plate. He's just a person and he can make mistakes. And you know what? I'm going to see how I can help him do that. And then I'm going to do this, this, and this. And then it lets you take a slower, more mature approach. Your pastor has no more anointing than you do. And if you think that numbers grow more, numbers make you more anointed than not, just go put out a flyer for free beer for 6th through 12th graders, and then you'll apparently have an anointing, right? It's not about the numbers. It's not about what you do. It's about recognizing and submitting to one another and realizing that we're both human and actually trying to live like Christ in the midst of that. I wanted to throw that out before we went because I see a lot of guys
I think that's good.
Unhealthy to toxic behavior. I got that done to me. I had somebody set me down and tell me, and my pastor ended up having 3 simultaneous affairs and nobody caught him. You want to know why? Well, because he was anointed and because we were growing and because nobody held him to account until it was too late. And I don't want to see that happen other places.
Well, and that always makes me think of, like, of course, we're not given some details. We're just given kind of big picture stuff. But like, I always think about David. I always think about King David. And I always think about the fact that, like,
that's what A Tale of Three
David
is even about. Well played.
But well, there you go. I didn't know. I've never read the book.
It gets real short. It's an easy read.
But I always find myself thinking, people will try to say, well, he shouldn't have even been there. He should have been out fighting with his men. And well, clearly he wasn't. And the Bible doesn't really speak to why he was there. I don't believe he was we just know he was there. Right. So I think the thing is, like, most pastors that abuse their power are pastors who lack accountability in the right places. And the reason that they lack accountability is because the structures around them are set up because they don't, they've been left to just be the pastor because they're anointed. They don't need to have the accountability. And a man that will tell you that they don't need accountability is a guy that you should mark as someone you should walk away from, because the guy that thinks it can't happen to them is doomed to repeat the transgression.
Like it won't. You either can pretend like it can't or you'll act like it won't, and either one of those are dangerous.
Well, I'm just telling you, man, I see these guys, and look, it makes me physically sick when I see pastors who have moral failings.
Yeah.
Makes me physically sick. It makes me angry. But do you know what I realized very quickly? There for the grace of God go I. It could absolutely happen to me. And I talked to my wife about it. I'm like, look, I'm angry. I'm upset. Yeah. This is frustrating, but it is a reminder and it is a call to accountability and to action.
And can I say too, I think that we only think that sex and money are the only disqualifiers for ministry. And what you and I are talking about, maybe you don't, a lot of guys don't, but a lot of guys that are running giant churches and a lot of guys that are running small churches should not be in ministry anymore because you can disqualify yourself for things that have nothing to do with sex and nothing to do with money. And so knowing that it's about being like Christ and reading through, I mean, it's a humbling thing to read through the pastoral epistles constantly and remember those, but those don't all have to do with that. And the idea is if you don't just have healthy accountability from believer to believer, then yeah, you will roll down that road. But
it never, I think the road, my wife and I talk about all the time, like when we find out about an affair or whatever, and I'll tell Kristen, I'm like, that doesn't happen in a healthy marriage.
That's right.
And because people will say, well, I just thought those two loved each other. Well, I can't believe this. Well, I'm just telling you that was not a decision that person woke up one day and just made.
Right.
That was a decision that person made a while back by not making a decision. So when you see Joseph and Potiphar's wife and the continued pursuit of Potiphar towards Joseph, and Joseph refuses in the heat of the moment, that wasn't a decision that Joseph just made in the heat of the moment, not to have sex with an attractive woman. That was a decision he made ahead of time to honor God and to honor Potiphar. So the decisions that we make in ministry, the accountability that we accept in ministry, those are decisions you make ahead of time. Don't wait until the moment to fail presents itself to all of a sudden make a spiritual decision. If you're in a good season right now or in a hard season, start to put those things in place and parameters in place so that you will have the strength to stand when the day presents itself.
100%. I just remember it reminded me of a story. We used to hear this old horror story, and this guy's went, well, I'll just tell you right now, you got to be careful about all this stuff because there's a worship pastor at this giant church, and he was counseling with a woman in his office, and he just had an affair with her one day, and they caught him. And I said, I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. And I said, okay. I said, if that guy, I said, first of all, affairs don't just spontaneously happen. And I said, two, I know I'm going back to a sex example, but it's the easiest to say, to your point. Why was that woman in that guy's office? 2, I guarantee you that wasn't the first time, and it started somewhere. 3, if that guy was living an openly transparent, accountable in a marriage and had people around him, that wouldn't have happened because he didn't make the decision. Maybe no matter when that happened, or even if that was the first time, you didn't put guardrails in place that were just common sense. It's not like somebody goes, women and men can have affairs. I didn't even know that. How could I have prepared? No, you could have prepared because that's something God's word tells you about. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, and I would say this too.
Come on, man.
I don't know what that was. Something just fell in here and it startled me.
Maybe your office is clapping for us. Keep going.
No, I think that if your version of accountability is someone's asking me how my prayer life is.
Or asking 2 or 3 questions that you just answer yes or no.
That's not accountability.
No.
That's just kindness. But don't confuse kindness.
That's the problem of the pipeline.
But don't confuse kindness for accountability, because typically when you got people asking you that question, look, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with asking somebody what their prayer life's like.
Right.
But for the people in your life, I've got 3 men. Aside from Ian, aside from my dad, there are 3 men that I have hand selected within the church that are different generations from me that have the license to get in my Kool-Aid. And when I say get in my Kool-Aid, they're not asking me, hey, what's your prayer life like? That's part of what we're talking about. But they're asking me hard questions. Yeah. They're asking me how I'm treating my spouse. What are the conversations I'm having like with my spouse? How I'm treating my children? Does my wife look more like Jesus because she's my spouse? Can I cite examples? Like, when's the last time I shared my faith? Tell me about that interaction. They're asking me hard questions. What's the browser history like on your phone? Let me see it. Show it to me. All of those things. Ask hard questions. Because if you're scared to be asked hard questions, it's a you problem.
Well, and if you have, let's end with that. And if you haven't, by the way, if you haven't been listening or heard anything yet, this seems like an odd way to end something, but if you watch the trail for this podcast, you're going to see how do you serve for difficult people. And then in that, how do you know the difference between difficult and toxic? And so we ended on this idea. I want us, when we go behind the wall, we're going to start by talking about why so many people end up toxic and why you will too if you don't keep a few really important things in mind, because we become the very things we hate. And we're going to talk more about that. But I do want to recommend something to you, John. We have something new. Are you excited?
I'm excited.
Listen, we have this whole other half of the podcast. It's applicable. It's deep. It's more unfiltered than it is now. And it's hard to believe. But we're going to talk about it behind the wall. We have an active community of student pastors. We have resources, tools, and everything that you need for $27 a month. It's less than you pay for coffee for your leaders. But the cool thing is, we put the link below. You can actually try it out for free for a month, and we want you to try it out. Try jumping into the community. Look at all of the different games and leadership tools and sermon series. All of that is there, as well as Touch Points, which is a way to connect with students, leaders, and families, all in an engaging, fresh, and clear way continually. It'll make you the student pastor that student pastors want to be and that students want to be with. So all of that to say, you can be everything you want to be and more. Jump into a healthy community, because that makes the difference. We'll see you on the other side of the wall.